Hey, ladies and gentlemen, how are you all out there in internet land? This is your friend Charlie Hunter in Bellows Falls, Vermont, and we have a wonderful, wonderful, reasonably fine art talk today with one of my favorite human beings and favorite artists in God's green earth, Mr. Don Demers. Hi, Don.
Hello, Charlie. Thank you for that kind and inviting introduction. I appreciate that very much. It's great to be with you.
It's
You're one
great
of
to.
my favorite people, too.
Oh, it's going to be disgusting. It's going to be
It
like this
was.
mutual love fest.
Yeah.
Ah! Anyway, Don Demers is coming to us today from, I believe, somewhere up in the great state of Maine.
That is correct.
Yeah,
South Berwick.
South Berwick. Now, in
Yes.
South Berwick, is that near the potato fields?
No, that's the opposite end. You're up in Cherryfield County up there. I'm down in York County, right on the New Hampshire edge.
Okay, right on the border, right? So you can look across on a good day. You can see Portsmouth.
Right across the river. That's exactly right. It's right
That
there.
is awesome. Now, Don. Now, I believe, if I remember correctly, you grew up in Lunenburg, Massachusetts,
I did.
and you went to Mass Art. Is that where that was
Yep.
your?
I bounced around to a couple of schools, but that was the one where I concluded my study, shall we say. I never graduated.
Oh, really? So, and you started out as a commercial illustrator. Is that?
Yep. Very, very humble beginnings. When I was in art school, I somehow cobbled together a commercial art set of skills. Everything from doing mechanicals for printers to little graphic design, illustrations in trade magazines, and it's slow and very humble. In a very humble ascension, I worked my way into being an illustrator. That was interrupted because I quit art school in frustration. I had about a year left, and I just had it. And I went to sea and worked on sailing ships for a couple of years. But then when I returned, that's when my illustration career started.
Okay, and how did the love of boats and ships and boating and shipping come about?
Yeah, it's inexplicable. It was something I was exposed to as a kid. My grandparents, and thanks for asking. By the way, I haven't even thanked you yet, so thank you very much for having me. It's nice.
Well, we also have to thank Betty Sue down there in Austin, Texas.
Absolutely, we wouldn't be looking at each other right now if it weren't for her. So,
exactly.
So thank you for the consideration of having me here. It's important for me to share with you. So, yeah, I was just a little squirt and went to the coast of Maine on vacation. My grandparents had a small place, very humble little cottage up in Booth Bay. And before that, and I'm sure you had the same experience, when I was a little kid, I was drawing all the time. It was jet planes and monsters and tanks and all that kind of stuff out of boy's life. But when I got to Maine, the first time I saw a sailing ship, some inexplicable connection. It just happened. It was a 3-masted schooner on the horizon. And that and the smell of salt water. And my life's path was pretty much cemented. So
interesting, because last week I was talking about my love of gas stations.
I know. I started watching that and I got interrupted. I want to finish it.
But it's the same sort of thing. There's this inexplicable, or why I fell in love with trains, or just seeing the boxcar, the way light was hitting the boxcar, crossing the Route 101 in Milford, New Hampshire, and the side of the boxcar said Nickel Plate Road, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I mean, it is that random and that evanescent and that fleeting, but it makes the lifelong connection. So
yes, yep.
Now,
I try to assign it to a more logical origin, and I can't. I don't know, previous life or whatever it was, but from the first time I saw a gaff-rigged sailing ship, I could not take my eyes off
them. And what Don is a gaff-rigged sailing ship?
Well,
how will I know that it's gaff-rigged as opposed to a other rigged sailing ship?
Yeah, a typical modern sailboat has what's called a Marconi rig. It's a triangular sail. A gaff rig is trapezoidal. It's got a gaff on the top, one spar, and then a boom on the bottom. So it's a trapezoidal shape. Much more.
And is a Marconi rig named after Marconi, the inventor, or?
It is indeed, yeah, because they began to engineer vessels that could have higher masts, and so the higher mast required more stabilization, and it was the same kind of rigging that Marconi used to ascend his antennas. So
Interesting.
yeah, that's where it comes from. Yeah.
All right. All
Yeah.
right. Now, in case folks, I can't believe that people aren't, but in case any folks aren't familiar with Mr. Demers' work, we have a little slideshow, just a few pieces to show.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know if Betty Sue is ready, but it looks like she is. Yes. So we start out. This to me, it's really interesting. You have this reputation as a marine painter,
Mm-hmm.
and to me, one of the key things in finding our own voices as artists is finding the right object, the thing that resonates with us, that we have something to say about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we do our jobs right, we are initially drawn to the nominal subject matter, but then the more proficient we get with that subject matter, the more the paintings can really be about the interplay of light and dark, about shape, almost about philosophical issues.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, there is a grandeur in your work that I see this, and then the final slide we'll see is nominally the same subject matter. It's some water, uh, and it is a very different. It's a very different take on it. Now
Mm-hmm.
you do it. You have an astonishing command of painting water. I would. You can't even stun water. It's going to keep moving. How the hell do you do this, Don?
That's a very legitimate question, and I think I've got a pretty straightforward answer to it. And we've all heard these axioms, as as we've been taught to paint and have been teaching each other through the years. There's no shortcuts, and it's dedication and observation, and then ultimately invention once there's a fluency with your subject. So I just started looking at the sea when I was a little boy. And I was down there on those rocks up at Ocean Point, Maine, constantly watching the patterns and the rhythms of the sea and making absolutely horrible portrayals of it. And what I've learned over the years is that there is, in the effort to create pictures of a subject, particularly a kinetic subject, once you have a certain degree of visual understanding of it, then I would invest in the scientific understanding of it, hydrodynamic, weather systems, currents, tides, and you begin to accumulate this body of knowledge that gives you a greater understanding than just looking at it once. So this picture, because it's a studio painting, is done entirely from my imagination, and our imagery become paradigms for us. There's a particular way that I paint the sea. There's a particular way that anybody else who takes on this subject. Painting is a series of symbols, and so it ends up being this amalgam of this greater understanding than the quick observance of the subject would allow you to have. So, does that get there?
It starts to scratch the surface. I mean, I look at the command of, I'm looking at the horizontal band, the middle band.
Mm-hmm.
The light coming through, the translucency of the light, like light through jade at the top.
The stained glass window.
Then it going into that dark where there's no light coming in,
Mm-hmm.
and then the crest of the wave. I'm talking about the central wave in the center of the painting. Now
Mm-hmm.
looking at the dead center of the painting, the light hitting the crest of the wave, and then that shadow. And boy, you get the temperatures and the values and the edges so perfectly right. And then you move back into the light of it crashing to the left. So the motion of this is so masterful, and the way you've got the light, it just, I'm glad you studied those hydrodynamics. That's all I can say.
Well, there is a lot of that to it, and again, thank you. Your words are so flattering and so affirming, and I really appreciate it. When I am dealing with this subject, I think in tense, past tense, present tense, and future tense. And because of, I come from an illustrator's orientation, if you will, where we have to develop our pictorial skills. We just have a rectangle to work within, and we have to figure, it's like a sports field. You're either in bounds or you're out of bounds. Mm-hmm. So if you're in bounds on this rectangle, it's our requirement that we're able to portray our subject into its full manifestation. So when I'm painting a seascape, I am always, almost without exception, thinking about what had just happened, what is currently happening, and what will happen. Because it's really a miraculous thing. It's a form of meditation. It's a form of observation in our world. But I get to watch salinated water, salt water, go through 3 or 4 different forms. First, it's a liquid. Then it's aerated and becomes a foam, and it becomes opaque as opposed to the transparent aspect where that light shines through that wave, as I said, like a piece of stained glass. And then it becomes vapor. And it just about disappears before your eyes for a matter of seconds. Then it attenuates, it drops, it collects, it goes back off the shore, and it becomes liquid again. And you're watching this magnificent thing go over and over and over and over. And I'm 64, and I'm still mesmerized by it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Edward, who I believe is up in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, which is the Lunenburg that first came to mind when I read that you were from Lunenburg. But yeah. Edward asks, who have been your influences in painting ocean waves?
Yeah, it's a great question. Pretty simple answer. Not currently, for a long time, but since I was introduced to his work, Frederick Judd Waugh, brilliant practitioner of it. Early on, Winslow Homer. And what I love about Homer is he doesn't paint the sea as it appears. He paints it as it feels. He paints its inner spirit. He's not obligated to pictorial devotion at all. He gets through the surface characteristics and he goes to the very essence of what the sea does. So there's Homer, Frederick Judd Waugh, of course, William Trost Richards was a big influence. David James, English marine painter. And there's a great blog, by the way. I think I have it right. Ocean Marine Painting in Oils. There's a long roster of painters that. So then we can go to Paul Doherty, a California Impressionist, William Ritchell, Armin Hansen. I mean, there's a lot of them who I.
A lot of them. A lot of painters of ocean hydrology.
Mm-hmm.
And this, to me, I mean, what you've just brought into the explanation of this one painting, it's basically, you're talking about a very spiritual totality of the cycles of life, the cycles of existence. But one thing I wanted to touch on is you've got, I go through this in terms of doing railroad imagery. One essentially has to agree to be viewed to a degree as a genre painter, as opposed to a painter. And I've decided, well, my friend, since we both like musicians a lot, my friend John D. Graham is a great Texas singer-songwriter. He says, after you hit age 50, your give-a-shitter just kind of stops working. So how have you made peace with people who say, oh, Don, yeah, you're good at painting boats, but don't you want to be a real artist?
I've certainly faced that, and I have to get the name of that singer-songwriter. I'm not familiar with him.
He's great. I will. We can make that happen.
Yeah, I've actually compared it to musicians a lot because how many times does James Taylor want to come back and sing Fire and Rain again.
Right.
So what is your blessing? I wouldn't say is also your curse, but it can be a limitation. It's what you sign on for. And yeah, it's a little bit diminishing, I suppose, when I'm categorized that way.
Right.
Because marine painting on and to itself has always been sort of a subcategory of that greater breadth of, as you say, as we say, fine art. So, but at some point there has to be an admission that, well, I've been doing this a lot and I've been doing it for a long time. And what else would I expect?
Right.
I'd rather be called a painter. I don't like being called an artist, by the way, but I like being called a painter. And then all you can really do beyond that, and there are the considerations that you and I do this for a living, and so there's an audience for this kind of work for me, and I try to keep my motives internal instead of external. But nonetheless, if you do this for a long time, that presence is there somewhere in your mind.
You got to eat. You got to eat.
Yep. And then all I can do, and because God knows how many seascapes have been painted, they're hanging on every barbershop wall from here to California and back, or clipper ships, even worse.
Yeah.
So it's become a cliched subject to the point where it has lost its recognition and its power potentially. So then I just continue to remind myself that you've got to find something deeper in you that brings spirit and life to the subject. And
right.
it's not about the motif. It's not about how pretty the picture is. It's about something that's deeper within that subject matter. And then you just have to live with the fact that most of the time when I get introduced, it's Don Demers as a marine painter. No, but right. I'm more. I want you to know I'm more.
Well, so much more. Let's go to the next slide. And Joe Paquette, who can't paint his way out of a paper bag, that guy. He's wondering what your color palette is, Don.
Joe Paquette really wants to know that.
He says he does.
Wow.
I'm sure our viewers do.
Okay. Well, it's not the prismatic palette, so it's more convoluted than that, if you will. But it's based upon the three primaries with a different temperature of each. And I can get specific if you want, but cobalt and ultramarine blue, cad yellow medium, cad lemon. I actually use three reds, but cad red deep and alizarin crimson, sometimes cad red light. And then just because of my own personal instincts and interests, I fill it out. Well, let me go to the secondaries now, because I use Viridian on a regular basis in one particular Green Earth by Rembrandt, which is not a true green earth. It's actually made with raw sienna and black, I think. But I find it a very utilitarian color that I find in the sea a lot. Then I muck it up with all the earth colors because I love them.
Right.
Yep. Raw sienna, yellow ochre, burnt umber, raw umber. So that's one of the few things. I'm glad Joe asked this because it's one of the few things I actually got out of art school because it was really a terrible experience. I had one painting teacher who introduced me to that palette, and I've used it ever since. I was probably 20 or 21 when I was taught. So part of it's based on color theory. The other part is just based on my own personal penchants, things that I lean toward those earth tones and find a lot of use for them. So, but I wouldn't be the guy to teach color theory. I'm just not that qualified. I've done it as intuitively and instinctively as much as I have with any kind of system or deep thought into it.
Right. Well, now this painting, when was this done? And let me actually just blueberate about it a moment. One of the thing I like the way that we've organized this little slideshow because it moves through that first one is purely, if we're, again, nominal subject, purely about water and how water works. This has the boat upon the water and the land, and the sky has a much greater narrative role in this painting than it at least seemed to me to do in the first painting. But design-wise, that slash of light across the across the sail is such a it's such a gorgeous movement, and yet it has a is it a it's one of the ribs of the sail mimics the line of the hill, the mountain behind the boat. So there's this weird, amazing knitting of the the earth, the water, the man-made structure, and then the sky. I mean, it's huge to me, this painting. So now
Again,
you talk, I just gush,
I don't object to your gushing. It's perfectly acceptable to me. I welcome it. Thank you for your observations, because you know what it's like. We put these pictures together and we start with a blank canvas. So there are so many decisions to go from having a flat piece of fabric to having a convincing illusion. And if we do our job well as practitioners, much of what we do doesn't get noticed because it's like a good piece of acting. You know, you don't say, oh, that person is playing that role. They are that person. So if we've been successful in our orchestration and our method, then so many of those things go unseen. So I appreciate you pointing them out. So a couple of things about this picture is, one, this comes out of my illustration orientation and career. As I've heard you say it many times, you try to tell a story with your paintings. And obviously this painting has a high narrative content to it. So it's based on a scene off the West Coast and San Francisco. It's all imaginary, with the exception that I know what that schooner was. I look them up and I look at ship's plans, and I'll find out what other vessels were in the harbor at that particular time. So narratively, I construct the thing with facts. And then once I've got those facts down and I read a few entries from a ship's log or some book I've read about this particular vessel going in and out of the harbor, and the direction of the moon, that's a moon set, moon rise, of course. And so I assemble all these components in my head, and then I start sketching and create the picture. I love storytelling. I'm a nut about the classic illustrators. You know, Dean Cornwell, there was nobody that could assemble a painting any better than he could. So that's the tradition in which I paint it. I love the subject, I love history, and I love imagining what it was like to be on the water on board that pilot schooner under those circumstances with the moon glistening. The other component that comes to it is the fact that I sailed for a couple of years, pretty much full time. So I've been at sea under moonlight, and I can recall those experiences. It's really fun to draw those up again. It's pretty rewarding. To address your point about the way the layers of the painting are woven together, I really appreciate that, because I do think of, I don't know if pastiche is the right word, but there's a fabric to the painting. And I tell myself all the time that I'm really grateful that I do have some background in design, that the two-dimensionality is the building, it's the structure of the painting. That comes first. And then you push the illusion into it. So first you're dealing with height and width, spatial arrangement within the desired rectangle, and then you start pushing depth of field in and out. So I'm very methodical in my consideration of those things. And these start off as scratchy little graphite drawings at about 5 by 7 inches. And if I see some promise, I'll build it up. And a little tip for practitioners, I still have this old projector that I had as an illustrator for enlarging my drawings and that kind of thing. I'll take my little thumbnail, I pop it up on the wall, like 4 feet wide, to see if it's going to carry with its graphic strength or not. So I go through those steps to make sure the picture's going to hold together. This is fun stuff, putting lights on the boats and all that stuff.
This is one of the things I'm trying to do with the Reasonably Fine Art Talks, is to remove the element of shame around utilization of the projector.
Yeah.
You can't use a projector if you don't know how to draw.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can use it. It's just you're gonna have lousy paintings.
Yeah.
But you can use a projector in your artistic practice, I feel, if you also maintain a drawing practice, so you know how to build the image. But at times, scaling something up accurately, projectors are really helpful.
They're terrific. and I only use it with my own drawings. But you know, if I've drawn the thing out at a format this big, I don't want to take another day and draw it again.
Right.
So you can throw a grid on if you want, but I can pop the thing up on a wall and get a quick look and say, okay, that's got some power. That can carry at 30 by 36 instead of 5 by 7 inches or something like that. So
exactly. Yeah. So we're hey, Susan Coviello. Hey, Corey. Do you paint or sketch in plein air when you're out on a boat?
All the time. Yep. And my good
very woozly drawings.
Stern anchor, that's what does it. So you throw the bow anchor out. And so if you don't want to be pitching around, you just toss another anchor off the stern, and that'll settle you in. And yeah, I do color studies and drawings from my boat all the time. Not when I'm underway, but
cool.
I've had a lot of fun experiences. In fact, even drawing and sketching from my rowing shell has been a lot of fun. Just secure the sweep, so you get a little platform and a little watercolor sketch box, and sit there and get some studies in. So it's you just want to get as close to your subject as you possibly can, right. Which does speak about, harkens back a little bit, not harkens back, but it refers back to the use of photography, which I almost never use. I just, when I was an illustrator, I used photographic reference all the time, but I just find it tedious. It doesn't interest me. So I work from my sketches or my imagination and my firsthand, observational studies.
And when you work in a sketchbook, are you working in a sketchbook or on loose sheets of paper?
No, a sketchbook usually.
Yeah. Because
a sketchbook.
The thing that is so great about a sketchbook is once you fill it, you then start on the next sketchbook, and then over the course of years, you have these armatures for painting after painting after painting, and you remember. Yeah, I look at something that I sketched 15 years ago, and I remember that day. I remember what was on NPR that, when that was the story about the Sierra Madre, and
there's so much truth in what you just said. I have had that experience so many times. Go ahead, continue.
Yeah,
please.
Well, that's about it. I had nothing profound there. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. Next slide, please. Now this looks like classic illustration to me. To me, this is like an homage to just a world of painting that you love. But tell us about it.
You just described it. That's precisely what it is. Anton Otto Fisher, great maritime illustrator. There were so many of that era.
Is that the same era as James Montgomery Flagg and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he created a character called Tugboat Annie, and he became very famous for her Noble. I think John Noble. He had a studio on a barge in the East River, and he was out there all the time. He did a lot of lithographs, a lot of paintings, just grimy, gritty subjects. So yes, I have a particular penchant love for this mysterious era, this collision of sailing ships and steamships and ash.
And about when would that have been? When, 1890s to 1920s, or?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly when it was. And narrow gauge and
right.
large gauge railways, and the way they'd come down to the docks and they'd offload gear onto a vessel. And there's a place in Wiscasset right on the river up there where that confluence used to be active. So yeah, it's a romanticism that I have for this era of guys with cigars in their mouths and all that kind of stuff. Why I love it, I'm not quite sure, but I've loved it from the time I was a kid. And so with that in mind, with that romantic storytelling notion in mind, I wanted to make this painting and do some inventive things like put blue smoke coming out of the tugboat. But again, all pictorial devices, and very, very conscious of the illustrator's tradition when I painted this. I love being able to transport myself for a while, and if I could fall into 1918 New York City or Boston Harbor and have some time. It's honestly, as I told somebody not too long ago when they asked me what I did, and I said, well, I'm a painter. And I said, really, I make believe.
Right.
That's what I do for a living. I make believe. And it's the same thing I did when I was 10.
Right.
So, That's what I'm doing here. I'm making believe. So,
Right. Well. It's what was the book? It's not a very good novel. It's a fun read, but is it called Time After Time, where there's a government project where they through really living in a recreation of 1910 Vermont town, they certain people are able to actually go back in time, and he goes back. It's a fun read. It's pretty stupid, but it's you would love it. I mean, he ends up he succeeds in doing it during a blizzard. He's walking in Central Park, and he's walking in Central Park in the blizzard, and then comes out of the blizzard, and it's gas lights and horse and buggies. So no, and there is an element of that we get to be time travelers when we are deep in these paintings.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's an indulgent, personal thing to do, but it is. I mean, I never really find painting to be fun. Because it's so demanding. So I don't relax when I paint ever, but I do immerse myself, and I can fall into this thing that you're describing.
The zone, the time disappearing. Well, what I always used to say about hiking was I never enjoyed hiking, but I really enjoyed having hiked. And that's sort of about how painting feels. It's like that great quote from Motherwell that all paintings are really collections of mistakes, and how you resolve those mistakes gives you the next, but yeah, it's exhausting, but what a great thing to get exhausted by. Now, Meg had Betty Sue put up this quote that Meg had said earlier. She said, "Sailors truly appreciate the honesty and truth of the subject that the paintings of Dawn's generate. I think we recognize the vessel's rigging, the movement and light, and can almost smell the subjects that Dawn captures." That's what Goran says in Sweden, or I guess it's Goran saying in Sweden.
Yes, that's it's actually Goran. He's a dear old friend of mine. We sailed a lot together.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he is a true blue water sailor. We sailed through the Caribbean, through the Panama Canal, up the West Coast. We were shipmates for many months together at various times. So he's the real thing, that guy. Great.
Oh, awesome. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. Now, I believe we move off of the water.
We do.
We come clambering onto land like those first fish, breathing tentatively. Talk to us about this. Why'd you choose this one?
I was painting with my good friend Tim Lawson. We were up in Lincolnville. He has a place up in Rockport, Maine. So this was an outing. And oh my God, was it cold that day. 8 or 10 degrees outside, just biting cold. And he and I were just exploring the mid-coast area in his pickup truck looking for painting spots. And we pulled down this side road. And this is when my intuition supersedes my cognitive process. So I just start painting intuitively when I'm on location like this. And I actually find I end up being a better painter, one, if I work at a small scale, and two, if I have limited time, because I get out of my own way. And so this is obviously the waning light of a bitter cold winter day. And it has for me now, I'm going to be a little bit indulgent here. It just has a deeper truth and an honesty than some of my more finished paintings do. You get to peel away the veneer a little bit, and this painting is more experiential than it is the intent of creating a picture. So I trained myself to be a picture maker. In the last maybe 10 years or so, I should be careful about this with respect to my collectors. I really just feel like I've started to be a painter in the last 10 years or so. And the intuitive freedom and the brevity of executing a picture like this, one, it's very rewarding because, again, it's experiential. It just has an internal reactive intention behind it. It's not convoluted by anything else other than the experience I'm having right now.
Now this is a tiny little painting. It's just 6 by 8.
Yeah, it's just a puny thing.
Is the canvas toned?
No, when I get to it, thanks for asking. I like the technical questions. When I get to I always start with an untoned canvas, but I underpaint it very quickly with what I call either harmonious or analogous colors underneath it. And I just do it with a paper towel. I just start rubbing a tone to start getting a feel for it. Occasionally I'll use complementary colors, but typically I just try to look for a local color and feel my way into the painting that way as quickly as possible.
Because you've got there is the warm color in the clapboard under the clapboards of the house.
Yeah.
And that's the rubbed in.
That's the underpainting, and then a little bit cooler tone on top with the opaque, and get that slight textural vibration to it.
Yeah. Oh, it's lovely. It's lovely, and I love. You get that as a fellow New Englander, that that light in the sky that looks so warm and inviting. It could be a Ennis, Florida sky, but if you're from New England, that it is colder than all get out when the sky is like that. You know exactly how cold that is.
It can be very deceitful. And two more things quickly about this picture is thank you for mentioning that, because I consider paintings in their purest form to be a delivery system to either an idea or an experience. So this was my delivery system for this experience I had. An hour or so with my buddy on a cold, cold winter day. And there's also some sentimental attachment to this because I grew up on farmland, and all of the Finnish side of my family were all congregated on this hillside called Fisher Hill. And the family farm looked identical to that, with my grandfather Buppa and my great grandmother and all that. And so that's why I was immediately attracted to this. I knew it. I could feel it. So.
And where was that? Where was that farmland?
Right in Lunenburg or Fitchburg.
Oh,
it's
okay.
Next door. Yeah. So.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I grew up in. That's interesting. I grew up in Milford, New Hampshire.
Yeah, we used to go up there to the trading post to buy hiking boots.
Right. Exactly. Haywood's. Right. And do you know the painter Eric Aho?
I do, of course.
Yeah, and Eric grew up in Hudson, New Hampshire, and he's Finnish. Yeah. I mean, so we're all the same.
We are.
It's understandable why our work resonates with one another.
Yes.
Let's go to the next slide, please. Because this is probably a studio painting, I'm thinking, because it is so it seems so closely observed.
I did have an opportunity to observe this, and I'll give you just a quick narrative how this painting transpired. It was at my previous home. I had a second floor studio with a big, beautiful window looking out over the backyard. And I was working on a marine painting. It was after a fresh snowfall one night. And when I walked in, I looked out the window and I just pushed the marine painting out of the way. And I just looked down from my window and saw this below. So I had a nice 3-hour window, 4-hour window to paint. I love that overcast ascendant light. It's nice and steady. You're not chasing the thing around. And so the offering that this had for me was to be able to breathe, for one thing, take my time, and have a really deep, thoughtful consideration of this simple subject. So I think you probably will agree with this, that when I'm at my best, I'm usually out of my own way, and painting becomes a form of meditation. It's internally motivated. You do reach a spiritual realm. There's a communion. The lines between you and your subject disappear, and this thing happens that is pretty profound. It's very private, but I'm in a space where my intellect is not even pestering me.
Right.
And if you're fortunate enough to have enough facility in your craft that you're not stumbling over that, then you can really go into a realm that is, when you step out, it's a profound experience to have been that connected to the earth you live in. And it can be the simplest thing as a tree branch. So when I popped out of this experience, I was about 20 minutes from having the painting finished. And I came out of my dream and said, please don't screw this up. Don't start tripping and stumbling over yourself. So most of it was a really pure experience. I just had to behave myself and keep myself calm, so I didn't so I didn't
Right.
ruin.
Absolutely. No, and those are when that happens. Well, my songwriter friend Garnet Rogers says that the job of being a songwriter
You're
is
friends
that,
with whom?
huh?
You're friends with Garnet Rogers?
Yeah, I've done a couple. I did one of his album covers and stuff. But anyway,
Yeah. Wow.
but Garnet says that the job of a songwriter is you get up in the morning, you trudge up the hill with two pieces of bread, and you stand out there with your arms outstretched, hoping to catch a lightning sandwich. and, and you know, I think one out of 50, 1 out of 75 paintings is that experience that you're talking about, where
Yes.
you
I
go
know
into it,
about that.
yeah, and you slide into it, and then you aren't anywhere for a couple of hours, and then you come out of it, and the feeling is, please God, don't let me screw up.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah, that's exactly it. But two technical things on this. One, the purity of the observation of the snow on the spruce bough um, is so reminiscent of how, I mean, your knowledge of hydrology plays in the way the lacing of the snow on the bow is so reminiscent of the lacing of foam on water. That's one thing. Second thing, and this is for our painter friends out there, all aspiring painters, look how important the tree branch in the upper right is. And think about how that painting is, how the lacing on the spruce tree, the lacing of the snow on the spruce tree is activated by the white of the snow on that tree branch coming down through the spruce in the upper, on the upper right. That is so important. That what the white tree branch on the upper right is so critical to making the whole picture plane work, I think.
Thank you very much. My good friend Jackie, she'd seen this painting not that long ago, and she spoke of the branches as having a conversation with one another. And I really appreciated that comment. And thank you. Yeah, it is a reintroduction. And as we know, going back to the two-dimensionality of pictures, and I know you've seen this over and over, nature has a thrust and a rhythm and a pattern, but then it contradicts itself all the time. It has an arbitrary component that arrests it and holds it in place. And if you start looking, there are some forms, you know, redwoods out in the west coast, out in the west. Those can be difficult because they're so repetitive that it's hard to sometimes find that. There's a better word for it, but that interruption, if you will. So when I'm composing a painting and I'm in the two-dimensional thought process of the actual construction of the picture, if there's a particular thrust, and this painting has a pretty strong thrust from the upper left to the lower right, it just so happened that branch was showing itself in the upper right, but the only credit I can take is that I saw it and I utilized it to weave the composition together.
Exactly.
It's slipping off the canvas some way. Yeah.
It stitches. Yeah. It stitches.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll be very pleased to see, Julia, you're going to get your wish, because we're going to come to the culmination, I think, of the Don Demers oeuvre with the next slide. Let's have the next slide, Betty Sue. This painting, the first time I saw it, it just, I don't think I've ever seen it in real life, but the first time I've ever seen, you gave it to your daughter, if I recollect correctly. But it's an 8-inch by 10-inch painting to me. It's not to me. It's an 8-inch by 10-inch painting, and to me, it is so spiritual because, well, first off, it's beautifully painted. It's beautifully constructed with the land into the water. Technically, the way the light, the translucency changes, but the idea that the tiniest wavelet is as holy as the most grandiose oceanscape imaginable I think this transcends the idea of marine art. This transcends realism. It's an astonishing work. So talk about it a little, Don, not to put any weight on you there.
uh, Again, I have to just keep thanking you to make sure you know how much I appreciate your observations and your insight into my paintings. And this does go back to, be careful with my words. This is representative of the spiritual intention that I try to live by. That's an important aspect of me. We all have things that we know about the world, but there's a lot more we don't know. And to venture upon and be willing to live with an openness and a question mark in both of our intelligence centers, our mind and our heart. You can embark upon these explorations in a very ordinary day. And when I am able to do it with pigment, I'm so darn grateful. And so that's the motive behind it. In addition to this, I was at Casperson Beach in Venice, Florida, and there was activity off to my left and activity off to my right, and people were collecting shark's teeth there. That's a popular thing to do. And there was the din of the beach, the same sound that you'll get out of a ballpark, you know, that lower sound. And I had some students there, and they were all busy doing their thing. And I just had a quiet moment for myself. And what made me paint this picture was not the visual, it was the sound. This humble, sweet little wave, it built and flopped. It built and flopped. And when it flopped, and I say wave, of course, they just keep coming. But the wave was a symbol. It just kept representing itself to me over and over and over with this lovely, humble little flop of a sound. And I started to get hypnotized. And the whole rest of the beach went away. And I've got a book kicking around on the shelf here somewhere. It's on Buddhism, being no one, going nowhere. And so within that empty space, and I know the tonalists exercise this practice a lot, the less there is in the picture, there's more room for the spirit to enter. So in its lack of subject matter, and with my being focused on the experience and not giving a hoot about whether I was making a painting or not, the painting formed. And it made me realize, boy, if you're really sincere and genuine and dedicated and immersed, good things can happen. And without getting too wordy about the whole thing, you know, we've all used that expression, boy, they really captured it. She or he really captured it in that painting. And when you think about the fact that, so we're multi-sensory bipeds and we're walking around on this planet in linear time. So I don't know how many thoughts a human being has in any given day, 50,000, 100,000. So things are always moving constantly. As long as we're awake, we're experiencing linear time in multi-dimensions. So if we can actually take a piece of fabric and capture a moment of that for ourselves and be able to step aside and have that arrested and to be celebrated, that's about as much as I can get out of painting. Mm-hmm. And I was just given such a gift that morning when I painted this picture.
I'll say it's like, it reminds me of the Robert Frost line, one could do worse than be a swinger of birches, you know. That's a beautiful, beautiful work, and I think that's words to live by. So let's just let's go just the big pictures of our noggins, and then we'll say goodbye.
Okay.
So, boy, that was a terrific little tour through your work. Betty Sue, can you just go to our enlarged heads?
Thanks, Charlie.
Don, that is beautiful, beautiful work. Now, you're going to be at Plein Air Live.
I am. Yeah.
And people wanting to learn more about your stuff should just go to dondemers.com.
Yes, and actually, I want to do this for the sake of the audience and not to pitch a single thing. But yeah, donalddemers.com is my website. It sits quite stagnant, doesn't move like the sea does. But there's also a program, the American Academy of Landscape Painting, that I've been involved in forming. It's being hosted by Lime Academy. It speaks to what you and I mentioned, I think, before we went on air, about the long. It's a more extended format for teaching landscape and seascape painting instead of the 3 to 5 day workshop format. And I know, my buddy Joe Paquette, who's kind enough to join in here today, he's done a fabulous job with his teaching methods and his curriculum over the years. So this is similar in that. So yeah, if anybody's interested in longer term study, the American Academy of Landscape Painting.
And can they access that from your website?
I don't even think there's a link on mine.
Get cracking! Put a link up.
I should have people to do this for me.
But, you should have people, yeah.
LimeAcademy.org is where they can find it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for taking the time, Don.
Oh, Charles, I'm flattered beyond words, and so good to spend time with you. It means a great deal to me.
Thanks again. It was a joy. I mean, your work is so magnificent. So take good care, and everybody out there in internet land, you take good care too. And we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.